After hearing this parable of the wedding feast, I can understand the king being very disappointed and angry about those who rejected his invitation to the wedding feast. It's said that in those days, when a wedding feast was being prepared, there wasn't really an exact date that they could send out an invitation and say you had to be there, because they had to do a lot of planning. And the planning meant they had to finish their harvest. They had to finish getting everything purchased. And so by the time that it was ready, then an announcement would be made. But the king always said, there will be a feast, and so be ready. So be ready. And so he had to be very disappointed and angry that people didn't show up, gave all kinds of excuses. After all, he had the brats ready, the lamb chops grilling, had the beer and wine on ice, and he probably had a DJ with the music prepared and ready to go. Add this to the culture of the times. The king had an empty reception hall. He was humiliated and shamed by this lack of guests. After all, he was the king. And so he had to be feeling a great shame and humiliation. In the eyes of the king, this rejection was callous and insulting, and he was not a happy camper. But what really caught my attention was not so much the king's reaction, but it was the person at the end of the parable without a proper wedding garment. That person did accept the invitation, but was not properly dressed, and was thrown out of the banquet hall. That at first glance is disturbing, because we wonder how someone invited late can be expected to have a wedding garment. He wasn't invited originally. We don't know what his social status was or whether he had any work or anything, but he didn't have it, but he was invited. He was just probably outside hanging out with nothing to do. But receiving the invitation, he probably said, why not? Good food, plenty of free booze, dancing, a lot of single ladies. That sounds like a pretty good gig for him. And so he goes in with this invitation. But what helped me to understand the decision to throw the guest out of the wedding banquet is what I like to call Bible speak. In the Bible, the wedding garment is used symbolically. Clothing is often used in the Bible as a symbol for conduct, the way that we live, the actions that we carry out. That is the idea of a garment, especially a wedding garment. And the wedding feast is also symbolic of the end time, when the Lord will be calling us to eternal life. And so clothing is often used as a symbol, as I say, for conduct. In baptism, a white cloth is placed on the child with the following words: put on the garment of Christ, meaning live your life in a manner befitting your new status as a child of God. The guest without a wedding garment then in this parable is simply a symbol for one who did not put on the conduct of Christ, one who hadn't lived according to his call, who hadn't been faithful in his love for the Lord. He talked the talk, but did not walk the walk. And so that's why the Lord was, the king in that parable was so decisive in getting him out. He says, you don't belong here. You didn't do those things that were needed. God continues to invite all of us to the wedding feast. When people refuse the invitation in the parable, the king cuts them off. But our God is so different. Our God continues to invite us day after day. God never tires of asking us, won't you come to the wedding banquet of my Son? But it is not enough simply to receive God's invitation. We must truly live as a child of God. We must wear the proper wedding garment. We must live our faith following the example of Jesus. To accept the invitation to the kingdom, to share God's life through Jesus Christ, means more than just showing up in church, and that's very important. It means living our daily lives in a manner befitting our new status as a child of God. It means to be open to the everyday invitations from God to grow in His image and likeness. How often in our lives has God suggested that we look at the way we judge people, say of another race or of another religion or political view? How often has God invited us to do some good work, indeed for another person, to help an elderly neighbor, or to visit a sick friend, to give something of what we have received to those who have less? How many times has God invited us to be thankful for the people in our lives, to take time with our children, to address issues in our marriage, to be thankful for our friends and for the people with whom we might work? As mentioned earlier, at baptism, we were given a baptismal garment to remind us that we are a child of God. It is not only a garment that we wear when we come to Eucharist. It is a garment we should wear every day. Every day we put on the actions of Christ in our lives. We need to ask, what is the condition of our baptismal garment? Is it tattered, dirty, soiled? It might be, but it's still our garment. And we still have the opportunity every day to make that garment more beautiful as we try to live our faith and follow the example of Jesus. Is our baptismal garment just a distant memory, or is it in constant active commitment to sharing our lives and living our lives with the priorities of following Jesus? I want to conclude with some beautiful words from Pope Francis. He says, Christ invites all of us to go out and encounter others. He sends us. He asks us to move in order to spread the joy of the gospel. Once again, he says, let us ask ourselves, are we missionaries by our words, and especially by our Christian lives, by our witness? Or are we Christians closed in our hearts and in our churches, sacristy Christians? Are we Christians in name only? What kind of a Christian am I? Is my witness true? In other words, do my works reflect the baptismal garment I was given at baptism?